Welcome to the Trying Again podcast. I'm Rachael Smith. This podcast tells a story of miscarriage, of the usually silent 1 in 4. If you're new to the podcast, you are very welcome. You also might want to go back to episode 1 and listen through. It will give you an idea of why I'm here talking about baby loss. In this episode, I'll explore miscarriage from the couple's perspective. The conversations in this episode will be frank.
It's very difficult to continue believing that you will get your good outcome when it just happens over and over and over again.
And they may be difficult, but they are needed.
Seeing this as a joint effort, I think is a very positive thing.
No one is perfect, and not all relationships last after loss. It's a very personal journey. Professor Arri Coomarasamy, director of the Tommy's National Centre for Miscarriage Research, touched on this in our recent chat.
There is very clear evidence that if the DNA in the sperm has got problems, it can have fragmentations, little breaks in the DNA, then that would increase the risk of miscarriage. It would more than double the risk of miscarriage. Many studies have showed this association. So we know it's there. So the question now is, how do you reduce the risk in such men who have got high levels of DNA damage in their sperm? We don't have any clear-cut answers, but we do have some interesting leads that we are pursuing in research that we hope would give some answers and would improve the chances of pregnancy in couples in whom there might be a male reason for the miscarriage in terms of problems with the DNA of the sperm. So this is very early work still, but I think this has the potential to help a lot of couples.
And that must be really hard as well in this area of conversations with couples, because I think it must be so difficult to find people open enough to do that and keep their relationship together and not lay blame, point fingers, all the rest of it. That I can imagine that's really difficult for your team to navigate.
It is. And I mean, it's kind of, I guess, natural, to find out, is the problem with me, or is it with my partner, or is it with both of us? We would all want to know that. And I think in truth, often, there may be elements of some problem in both partners, and there could be scope for improvement in both. But I think it's important to recognize it takes generally it takes two people to have a child, and we know that an embryo has half the chromosomal material from the mother, but the other half is from the male partner. And so we definitely need to look at the effects of male on the risk of miscarriage. And we know that advice such as limiting the amount of alcohol and cutting or stopping smoking and healthy diet and so on aren't just important for egg health, but also for sperm health. They apply to both partners. And so I think, both partners, getting involved with improving the kind of optimizing the conditions so you have a good outcome, I think it's a very positive thing. So rather than seeing this as framing it as a woman's problem, and it's only the woman who needs to be investigated, treated, and it's, she who needs to have the counseling, and it's she who has to, make the changes. I think, seeing this as a joint effort, I think is a very positive thing.
Research conducted by YouGov was released to coincide with a film by UK broadcaster Channel 5 called Miscarriage, Our Story. The research showed 47% of people surveyed said they'd found it difficult to talk to their own partner about miscarriage. In the film, journalist Anna Whitehouse discusses her miscarriage with her husband, Matt.
I think I was probably quite flippant in the first place about the idea of having children at all. And then I didn't realise how much I wanted kids until we started losing them.
Matt and I were not getting on, and we were so disconnected. We'd been so ripped apart by this perpetual cycle of loss and this determination to make life, and we'd shut down from each other. And I remember thinking in that moment, I keep thinking I want this family, I need this family. Like I was chasing something, and I was like, my family is right here, it's with Matt. It's not 2.4 kids and a white picket fence. It is the man in front of me, and I'm losing him every day that I am in this cycle of grief.
I think it's very easy to get to the stage where miscarriage becomes the defining thing about your relationship, particularly when it's recurrent. If you don't stop and make sure that you focus on each other and why you wanted to have kids together in the first place.
If you've listened to episode 2 of this podcast, you'll know the journey wasn't very easy for Lee and I. I've tried to be as honest as possible about how difficult it was for us as a couple. The arguments were real. There's lots of reasons to why. Some of them are pretty obvious. People are different. Grief affects people differently, and grief has no rules, boundaries, or timescales. Some may be not so obvious. Women's hormones are raging through their bodies, causing all sorts of confusion. Partners can feel powerless. Both partners can feel blame and guilt. Both may also be unable to support the other one's emotions. And then there's the taboo and the usual silence around that grief. It's a tricky one to explore. It's also an important one, and so I reached out to some couples willing to share their story. This is how I met Justin and Ashley. Justin is in my podcast Facebook group. Him and his wife Ashley reached out to share their story with Lee and I. We caught up with them online.
Found out we were pregnant in March, and I ended up bleeding 5 weeks along into our pregnancy. Ended up calling my doctor, and then they were, saying, well, there's sometimes that you can actually bleed and still have a healthy pregnancy. I was hopeful, but at the same time, I knew this isn't good. They had me do a bunch of lab work. I think it was the next day, and they did not find a fetal pole or a yolk sac. Pretty much they told me that I was having a miscarriage, but my body was not releasing the tissue on its own. So we ended up opting to do the pill and hoping that would pass all the tissue. That was very scary. I was very nervous to take this pill. I was bleeding quite a bit. And yeah, this pill I had to actually insert vaginally for 6 days. I was miserable. I was bleeding. But yeah, there was pretty much no baby is what it came down to. All my hormones, everything was saying that I was pregnant. If I took another pregnancy test, it would come back positive, but there was like no baby. It was just like an empty sac. So that was a hard month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was tough.
I didn't know what to expect. You read all these things online. A lot of women don't talk about it. You don't hear much about it. So I was trying to reach out to a few friends, few doctors, but I didn't have any close girlfriends that I knew very well that had one. So I started reaching out to a couple moms in my neighborhood, and sure enough, I think there's 4 out of 6 of us that end up having a miscarriage, but nobody talks about it.
It's just one of those things. I guess I would compare it to like mental health issues, probably, 10, 15 years ago. I feel like society has gotten a lot better about talking about mental health and making that better and not so taboo to talk about. But I think miscarriages are still kind of, obviously it's not a happy subject to talk about, and no one wants to talk about it, but if it was more prevalently talked about or more frequently talked about, I guess, it would help couples and the women cope better with it if it actually occurs.
All these things and questions run through your head. What did I do? What did I do? What did I do?
Yeah. Or what did I not do?
Yeah.
Should I have done something that I didn't? Or, there's just so much.
We had tried, I think it was like 5 months prior to that, every month. And we were super excited when we got, the positive pregnancy test. And then it literally was, like a week and a half later is when I started bleeding after that positive test. And I was like, this is not good. Now what? What do I need to do? What did I do, not do? And with COVID on top of that, Justin couldn't be with me in these appointments. I was told I was doing all these ultrasounds, all the lab works without him. To hear my doctor tell me in the office that you're having a miscarriage and Justin's on speakerphone hearing all this, that was really hard. It was hard to leave the office solo. Didn't know what to do, what to expect from here on out. The doctor, I told her I want 2 kids. We have 1. She gave me the green light. She said, whenever you're emotionally and physically ready, you can start trying again. So yeah, I ended up bleeding for about 25 days. I was actually furloughed for 6 weeks. So I luckily was home when all this was happening. We had sent our son Cameron to daycare every day. I didn't have the energy to be home with him, but I feel like I think I coped pretty well with it after the process was done. I don't know how it's hard when it's my body that's physically gone through it all. I mean, obviously Justin is dad. There's not, it's like, what can he do? What can I do?
Yeah, it's such a helpless feeling when she's going through this and you're basically forced onto the sideline, and there's nothing that you can do except be an emotional support. But you want to be able to do more. It's just I can't be at the appointments. You can't do anything. That it was hard for me just watching her go through this, and there's nothing that I can really do to help. You just feel so helpless.
And then I ended up after it was kind of all said and done, posting it on to my Instagram and Facebook wall. I had made a sign that just said 1 in 4 women miscarry. And I did not, I guess, realize that stat. I never looked it up. I didn't, so then I have a few moms in my neighborhood. We have this group text message going, and they're like, well, I went through miscarriage, and I went through one at 18 weeks with my twin boys, and I went through, so I didn't realize how common it was. And then after I posted it, that kind of was my, I don't know, I was kind of relieved. The coping helped, I guess, getting feedback from other women that it's very common. I can call anybody when I need to. It was very helpful. I said not a lot of women talk about it. Not a lot of women post anything about it. So I think actually posting it kind of put that, I don't know, chapter aside. I'm not sure. It just helped with me personally. I didn't even tell my parents that we were pregnant. So I couldn't even know how to say that we were going through a miscarriage.
Now, how do you lead with that? When they don't even know that you're pregnant in the first place.
Were you keeping it for the 12 weeks then? Were you waiting for the 12-week mark to tell family and friends?
We waited until about 8 weeks to tell our parents with our son. And, I really wanted to get past that first 8-week ultrasound before we told my parents. just personal preference, didn't make it to that mark. I couldn't. My mom is a retired nurse, and I know she would be asking me questions constantly. So I ended up texting all my parents and my sister. And I said, kind of gave them the little story on a text. Said, don't call me. I'm in tears. I can't talk about it. Just letting you know. And they replied, please let us know if you need anything. We're thinking about you. And that's all I needed until I was ready to call them and talk to them. It was one day at a time. But the good side of things, we actually ended up trying again, actually, that June and July. And I'm actually pregnant again.
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
So, we miscarried in May. My body was back to normal. We tried in June, tried in July, got pregnant in July, and we are 11 weeks pregnant today.
Oh, that's lovely.
We're very happy. Everything is looking great. Mm-hmm. There's a heartbeat. We got to see that in an ultrasound. It looks very promising. We're supposed to be due in mid-April 2021.
How does that feel?
Really good. I get very anxious, thinking, every time I go to the bathroom, which is more frequently than normal, I'm always paranoid I'm going to bleed. But other than that, I've thrown up and tired. I'm like, this is a good sign. This is a good sign. All these symptoms, I'm happy, which is crazy. So
Yeah, it's like that within that first 8 weeks. It was pretty touch and go, and I'd be at work and I'd see her call me or whatever, and I wouldn't be able to get to my phone or use it at the time, and you just got this your stomach kind of sinks. You're like, oh, please don't be another miscarriage.
I was really, after having the miscarriage, was wondering, would I have a second miscarriage? When? My doctor is like, you're in the geriatric because you're 35 and over. I'm like, oh gosh.
Might as well retire.
Jeez. So there's just all these questions and concerns still to this day. I mean, I will be like that the whole pregnancy. So far, everything is looking good. Miscarriage, it happens a lot. I don't wish it on anybody, but it is, it's not your fault. I have to keep telling myself it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. Nothing you could have done to change it. I just have to think that it was, something wasn't right. And that's, I took that in God's hands and it went, something was wrong. So I'm lucky. Hopefully we have a good, healthy baby with this one. I didn't think I'd get pregnant that fast. But we're happy where things are.
And it's been a ride.
That side of it, do you think you managed to come together through this, or do you think you've kind of grieved separately? How have you navigated that?
I think it's probably brought us together.
Yeah.
It's definitely brought us together, brought us closer. But I think we each kind of coped with it or did our grieving process separate for the majority of it. There are times where we'd be together and, but I think the majority of our coping happened just by ourselves. Whether by design or by choice, I'm not sure. I think it was more by design, just with my work schedule and,
anything that I needed, I'm calling him, texting him, whether he's at work or not. But I just liked talking with women that have gone through it and what their stories and hearing their story. And, every story is so different. So it was helpful to have women just in my neighborhood. It was hard. It definitely was hard. That month was, I was so nervous. I was so scared. Bled like crazy. Ugh.
And every day is like is it slowing down? Is it less blood than yesterday, or?
I mean, the nurse was asking colors and how much and this and that. And I was like, I want this done.
Yeah,
I want it to be done.
Have you got to the point of remembrance with your miscarried baby?
No, I don't know that we're going to do anything specific or anything like that. But
yeah, my sister-in-law said that she really wanted to give me a necklace with like little angel wings. But I didn't buy anything specific for myself. We didn't have any type of a little ceremony or funeral or anything, but
yeah. No kind of memorial.
No. Yeah, we didn't really do anything for it.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would have if there was
an actual fetus developing, but
because then I would have wondered, was it a boy or was it a girl? Like, I don't know.
I think that would have made it a lot harder too. I think the coping would have taken longer. It would have just kind of extended everything, I guess, emotionally and mentally for both of us, or at least for me. I guess I'm not going to speak for you, but for me, it would have.
It's a hard thing to go to. I ended up doing a miscarriage pregnancy journal with this. I needed to write it all down. For whatever reason, I wanted it on paper. I like to document things and then kind of put a closure to that too. I have a little bin that I had originally, that positive pregnancy test. I printed this journal and put that in there too. I had bought a baby bump book. I was having Justin take pictures of my bump every 2 weeks. So I had a 4-week and a 6-week. So I actually put that book in that bin as well, just kind of like a box of that chapter, I guess.
So I didn't even know about this bin. This is completely new information to me. So yeah, I guess as far as that, the previous remembrance question, there you go.
Yeah.
I had no idea that existed.
I just needed some type of a closure. So just to have that, I don't know where we're going to put it within our house, but at the moment, that's where it's been a couple months. But it's helped. Pregnancy journal has helped because people have asked, I want to hear your story. And, if I can help other women go, when they go through this, I don't know. It was a rough road.
It's a hard thing to go through when you're completely in the dark and you don't have that information at hand.
Coping as a couple was a topic that came up at the end of Lee's chat with Mike from episode 10 of the podcast. Lee and Mike invited Ellie and I to join them.
If you've had early miscarriages, getting to that 12-week scan is quite an achievement. Ellie often joked about kind of getting to the big girl scans.
Oh, yeah.
So progressing from EPAC to having your 12-week scan is a huge deal.
It's just even things like getting your pregnancy notes. You get your special book. I don't know whether they still do those at the moment, but you get that book and it's got everything in it, and the what to do guides and things like that, and just things like getting those. It just felt like you had graduated, that that you've got a viable pregnancy, but I could never even take that for granted. It's just horrendous to go through that sort of thing. My family referred to me as seeing the world through rose-tinted glasses, and I put it back to people actually that I'd like people to be able to see the world through my eyes sometimes, because to go through this sort of thing and still have hope and still be able to want to go through that and try again is such a huge thing, and it takes a huge amount of strength. It really does. So I know that. I can know some of what you might be feeling as a couple, and certainly for you, Rachel, what you're feeling as a woman going through that as well.
What was your strategy as a couple for coping?
I've got this amazing ability to kind of just harden and just completely kind of shut things out in the midst of it. I think, that was kind of one of my big things. And also just talking was a huge thing. We would talk and talk and talk, and sometimes we'd go away and then come back and revisit things and talk some more, and it helped. It helped that I could share the slightest things, from the most gory details of what I was experiencing physically through pregnancy and miscarriage and post miscarriage as well, and just being aware of that. I don't think people really do share that. I don't know.
You kept on apologising to me. You're like, is this too much information? Is this too much detail? I'm like, well, we're going through this. We are going through this together in some respect. So if you want to share that with me, feel free. Kind of, I can take it. I'm fine with it. If you need to talk about it, then go ahead. Kind of, we're doing this together. So yeah.
I think that you find what works for you as a couple, I guess, and what works for us might not necessarily work for someone else. I don't know, but I think the fights, the fact that everything was a fight was almost a distraction from what felt like the inevitable through each pregnancy. But yeah, I was told in the aftermath of our first and second miscarriage together, I was told by my GP, who I hasten to add I did change, that God willing, I'll have a child. When I was going in to talk about some pretty serious kind of mental health issues as a result of so mmany miscarriages. And I was working in a social care team at the time where children were kind of pre-social services. So it's kind of family intervention teams. I was going into houses where children were being neglected, where things weren't great, and just longing for a child. And it was just horrid. It was really, really horrid. And, the GP opened the door and shouted to the receptionist around the corner, "I think I need a talking therapies leaflet in here." Oh, what? I'm talking to you about a phased return to work and what might be appropriate for me in the 2 weeks following a miscarriage. And just the having to fight was a huge distraction for me, and anybody that knows me well will probably recognise that I do like to kind of dig my heels in, and if I see that there's a fight to be had, then I'll probably do my damnedest to make good of it and the right things happen. But yeah, I think that was probably one of the big things that got us through, actually. we had that distraction. But yeah, it shouldn't have been, and it's a horrific kind of byproduct of it all. But yeah.
I think also before we had Aidan, our first child, we'd got to a stage where we kind of sat down and we discussed our options, and we both came to the conclusion that we just needed to make sure, before we ruled out having children kind of naturally together, that we wanted to make sure that we'd gone down every possible route for us, available to us. We wanted to make sure that we'd explored all of our options before deciding otherwise.
Yeah, I think
we'd got to that conclusion, hadn't we?
Yeah, and also the adoption social worker had kind of said, well, you can't go forward if there's an option for you. And at this point, we were being referred in for the second time into the recurrent miscarriage clinic in Newcastle, which again was really difficult to be referred into, much more difficult than it should have been. We kind of just had to struggle through everything to get there. Throughout each pregnancy I had early bleeding, I had lots of scares, and oh God, the anxiety, and there's always been that complication. Something popped up on my Facebook memories the other day, and it's a picture of a chimpanzee with the belly stuck out and all hairy and bloated and what have you. And it just says quite simply, I was promised there would be glowing. I remember posting it partway through pregnancy with Sam. And I remember feeling the way that I was feeling. I was on quite high levels of progesterone. I kept on fainting all the time. And as well as the anxiety and things like that. And this ridiculous hair growth. It was awful. Like, I just felt like some kind of yeti. And I just remember thinking, I just want the pregnancy where I feel like I'm enjoying it. I wish that for any woman, that they go through a pregnancy and actually get to enjoy it.
It's also a topic that came up during the chat with Anjali Patel in episode 7 of the podcast. In our chat, Anjali shared with me what she thought about the impact of her journey on her relationship with her husband, Ash, not their real names.
We've kind of pulled each other up when the other one's been down. So there are times when I've just been in tears constantly for days, and my husband's managed to pull me up and offer me chocolate, or let's get takeaway, or let's get some pizza. And there are other times when he's been down, and I've known that, and I can see he's not himself, and I'll try and cheer him up. So, let's watch Top Gear, or let's watch some football or something, just to take his mind off it, even though I hate Top Gear and football. We've had separate counselling, and we've had joint counselling sessions professionally. And I found those sessions quite useful, actually. It was useful to to be able to talk to someone who didn't know us, who just sat there and listened to what we had to say, and, guided us through any awkward or any kind of really kind of upsetting feelings that we'd had. We were able to talk through it with the lady who was counselling us. I think for me, going through those sessions made me realise that I'm not an inadequate human being. That having a child is something I've wanted, but if that's not something I can have, it doesn't make, because of my body or whatever, that's not something that makes me any less adequate a human being. That there are other things, there are other ways you can enjoy your life too. And those sessions helped me realise that, whereas I hadn't before, even though my husband would tell me continuously.
And what's it like for you on Mother's Day and Father's Day?
So before, Mother's Day and Father's Day were extremely difficult. Just kind of like, we'd go and celebrate, I say celebrate, but we'd go and see our, like, mums and dads. So we'd go see our respective parents on those days. But obviously and I think one Mother's Day I kind of just shut myself away and just cried. I think that was a couple of years ago. I just cried pretty much all day. Now things are a little bit different. So whilst it was great having my first Mother's Day with Ethan, at the same time, I also felt a little bit sad because essentially my other babies, which unfortunately passed away, weren't here to celebrate with me. And I think my husband felt similar. So Mother's Day, yeah, it's special, and Father's Day, yeah, it's special, but at the same time there's that little bit of sadness as well, because it's another day that we remember what we've lost.
I was also contacted by Ross. Him and his wife Katie suffered 4 miscarriages in a year. After undergoing tests, Katie found out she had high natural killer cells. Working with the charity Tommy's and taking drugs as treatment therapy, the couple welcomed their son Callum into the world in July.
I kind of felt my body was failing what we were put on this earth to do. And I think we calculated at the time about 80% of our closest friends were, at the point of us going through miscarriages, were either pregnant or they had young children. And I felt like I couldn't say that I couldn't get what I wanted. And I felt, simply that I was just failing in doing what I wanted and what everybody else was doing and what everybody else had. And I think for me, I'm not really the right word, but I'm very competitive, and so I don't like when I fail at things. And as Ross just said, I'm a bit of a control freak. So it wasn't something that I liked to sort of feel about myself, that I was failing. Therefore, I was embarrassed and ashamed to tell anybody about it, really.
And now it's a bit different. Now you feel like you are empowered more. Yeah,
absolutely. But when we first started going through it, we didn't realise how common it was. And that's because people don't talk about it. They say, never say anything before the 12-week scan. And then a lot of people hit the 12-week scan, or don't even hit the 12-week scan, and get bad news. And they're afraid to say anything because it's such a taboo. So now I've spoken out, I feel so much more strength in myself to say it doesn't matter that I so-called failed, because I haven't. Even if I didn't have Callum, it's not something to feel ashamed or embarrassed about anymore. I think when I first put the blog out, I was also worried about my work. Well, some of my people at work knew, but my team that I manage, none of them knew. And even when I first put the blog out, I was still slightly embarrassed and ashamed of them finding out. Possibly because I was in a place of authority. But once we got the reaction that we did, I then felt the confidence to share with them as well. And since everything we've put out there, I've also shared through my work sort of grapevine as well, to make sure that we get the word out as much as possible, because it's given me that empowerment.
Has this helped you cope as a couple, do you think?
I think going through the process, we got closer as a couple. And I joined a lot of Facebook support groups for recurrent miscarriages and things whilst we were going through it. And I would see a lot of women on there posting saying how they were sad that their relationship was breaking down over it. But I think going through the miscarriages themselves for us, I think that brought us closer. So then putting our story out there as a team, as a couple, standing by each other, just validated it even more.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like, and one of the big things that we found throughout everything that we went through it, and Katie alluded to earlier, probably one of the toughest things was that we didn't feel that a lot of people understood what we were going through. And a lot of our friends, because of the age we are and were, I guess, happen to be having kids at the same time and starting families. So there's almost that sense of bitterness between us that everyone else was having what we couldn't have. And so we, unfortunately, and rightly or wrongly, we almost drifted away from a lot of our closest friends at that time, because we just couldn't bear to be around what we couldn't have. And I think as a result of that, we just came closer and closer together, because we couldn't be with the people we'd usually want to be with. And so we just were more determined to be with each other. And it was almost like we were the only two people in the world at that time who understood what was happening, what we were going through. And I think that kind of stronger bond has remained to this day, that I honestly can say that I feel closer now as a couple than we ever were before. And I think that's something that hopefully will never leave us.
And what's been the most difficult part to get to this point?
I don't know, the hope that it would happen. It's very difficult to continue believing that you will get your good outcome when it just happens over and over and over again. So it's hard to keep the belief and the hope to get to this point, I think.
Yeah, it's just that uncertainty about what your whole life leaves ahead of you, especially as Katie alluded to earlier. She likes to have a plan in life and know what's happening, and to not know whether you'd have a baby in your arms in a month's time, let alone a year's time, was just brought so much uncertainty to your life. And you're almost on on tenterhooks, not knowing what was going to happen. And for me, I think in one of the pieces we wrote, we alluded to it. It's not just that moment of the loss of the day that we miscarry and you have that grief. It's the months of trying for a baby when, it wasn't straightforward for us, certainly at the start, to conceive, and the anxiety that comes over every time of the month when you're waiting to see if we've been successful or not. And then obviously as soon as you're pregnant, it's every single day for us after the first loss was torture, just wait and see if it would happen again. And so it was this current nightmare that we could never really get out of. And at the time I was struggling with my work as well. I wasn't particularly happy where I was, and there was almost no release for us in that respect.
How did you get through that?
For me, it was focusing on what we can do. So I did hours of research of possible solutions and tests that I should be taking, doctors who I should be seeing, vitamins I should be taking, etc., etc. And so many people said to me, you need to take a break, and you take a break and relax, it'll happen. And for me, that was the worst advice possible, because it meant that I wasn't contributing to doing anything. And if I wasn't doing anything, there wasn't going to be an outcome. So I needed to control what I could control. So that's what the research and the continuing to trying for me was. But then I had my work that became like my safe space, that I went to work and pretended like nothing had happened. The only people that knew of my work was my boss and two close friends that actually worked at different sites. So I could go to work and pretend nothing was happening and have a safe space. So those two contributing it, that's what got me through it anyway.
To be honest, I don't think I did cope. If I'm honest, I think I probably I really, really struggled at times, and I didn't really know what my way out was. So it was only really relying on Katie, and I'm a runner as well. So when I was able to, that running was my release and my kind of escape from a mental health point of view. Though at the time as well, ironically, I was injured, so there was quite a few months where I couldn't even do that, and I think that probably actually was a large contributor to how I was struggling.
And how are things now with it all? How do you feel about it now you have Callum?
Yes, we've had our happy ending, but there's so many people that are going through it. There'll be so many people that can have the help and they don't get it, which is another reason why we're speaking out. Because if it wasn't for others speaking out, we might not have got our rainbow baby.
Yeah, I think for me, obviously not a day goes by where I don't feel incredibly grateful. And there are two things there for me as well. I'd say that there's an element of guilt. I know people personally who are going through a variety of issues around fertility and other similar subjects, and because I know what that feels like, and I know what it's like when other people have what you want, I feel a sense of guilt around that. And there's also an element, I think, whereby with yourself, you then feel an element of guilt if there's ever a day that goes by where you're not particularly enjoying being a mum or dad. You've been up all night and Callum's screaming, or he's throwing a paddy or a tantrum at you, and you get a bit frustrated. You can quickly catch yourself thinking, how dare you not be enjoying every single second of parenthood? And of course, that's not what being a mum or a dad is about. You treat it the same as every other person. But there's an element of that at times, I think.
These stories are just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many out there: blended families, same-sex relationships, and sometimes relationships break down. The Miscarriage Association has a leaflet on their website for couples called Partners Too. A part of it reads, "Grief can put a strain on even the best relationships, and it may be hard to say or do the right thing just when you need each other most." This episode was recorded by me in my duvet den. The music is Small Bump by Ed Sheeran. Thank you to Professor Arri Coomarasamy, Director of the Tommy's National Centre for Miscarriage Research, Ashley and Justin, Ellie and Mike, Anjali Patel and Katie and Ross. Miscarriage Our Story aired on Channel 5 on the 15th of October 2020 and was an ITV Studios production for Channel 5. At the time of recording the podcast, you can catch up with the documentary on the Channel 5 streaming service, my5.tv. If you're going through it right now, please know you're not alone. There's links to help available and to the film Miscarriage Our Story on tryingagainpodcast.com. If you've liked this, please share it and leave a review on your podcast app because it helps others find it. And remember to subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss an episode.
You can wrap your fingers round my